right, well, this is Brandon Jones, and we're going to dive into politics even a little bit more. And I really wanted to spend time, as you know, I do reach out to folks that I don't, politically align with on every single issue, and that doesn't matter because we need to really give information to voters and give them a better understanding of who the different candidates are and what they're trying to accomplish. And with us is going to be Cathy Lewis. Cathy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm so blessed. And Cathy, you're vying for District 20, the seat currently held by Tom Lee, going up against Ms. Joy Gibson. Just as a general overview, give everybody a little bit of idea what your background is and why you're even running for office.
Yes, well, I'm Cathy Lewis, and I'm running for Florida State Senate District 20. And District 20 is parts of Pasco, Hillsborough, and parts of Polk counties. What happened was, everyone's telling me, Brandon, that this is a very tough seat, and it's difficult, even unwinnable. And when I hear that word unwinnable, I think about my childhood. I'm from Baltimore. I grew up very poor in unwinnable situations surrounded by gun violence and drug use, unwinnable at every turn. And that sort of myth, and I scratched and clawed my way out of there. I made it to Johns Hopkins University. I graduated from there. And my husband met my husband, and he graduated from Johns Hopkins as well. And in fact, a kind of interesting thing about our family is my husband has a bachelor's, a master's, an MD, a PhD, and an MBA, all 5 degrees. And we're an African-American family, so that's something we're very proud of. And my daughter also graduated from Johns Hopkins. And I say all that to say that my childhood and my children's childhood is very different. And it took an incredible amount of focus to change the childhoods, drive, belief, and determination. But back to this unwinnable thing, it continues in my adult life. We also have a daughter with a disability, and we face unwinnable challenges all the time with her. So much so, she's 21. When she turned 18, she qualified for certain benefits, and I took about 15 months to get her these benefits, searching for papers and interviews, et cetera. And once she qualified, that's where everything stopped. The state didn't tell us what it would be, when it would start, anything. They kind of just stonewalled us, kept telling us it was in review. So I wrote an email explaining our case to 75 people, starting with the Health and Human Services Secretary, Dr. Tom Price. He's since been fired, but this was last summer, all the way down to those in charge in Florida. And I said, I'm going to send this email every day until someone responds. And I sent it at 3:30 a.m., and at 9 a.m., Dr. Price's office called me, almost fainted. And they said they had gotten the email and told me to call the Administrator on Disabilities for the entire country at 10 a.m. I called her. She said she'd already spoken with the people in Florida. She was clearly angry, and that if I didn't hear anything in 2 days, to call her back. Well, Brandon, that was a Thursday, and by Tuesday, my daughter's case was completely funded and ready to go.
That's awesome.
That was great for us, although once she got her benefits, that's a whole nother nightmare. But that was great for us, but it made me incredibly angry that I had to do that in order to get some action from the people in my state. And it was done so quickly in 2 days. So that's what made me decide to run for office, because there are families waiting. And this is a big piece of our state. This healthcare piece, this Medicaid, Med waiver piece, is huge. And we are failing miserably with our families. And we're all going to need a care provider at some point in our lives, unless we all die at 100 in our sleep, which is likely to happen. And this is the state is managing this in a horrible way. So that's why I decided to run for office.
You describe this issue as eliminating fraud and waste in our healthcare system. Mm-hmm. Give me a specific example of a measure or something very specific that you think would really help free up options for families, speed along the communications, and things like that you already faced.
Absolutely. One of the issues we have is the state basically, for in our case, we needed help. We needed people with disabilities often need care providers. And what the state does is they sort of farm these positions out to independent contractors that sort of have very little accountability. So they just say, here's the case, here's the money, you go off and do what you do. And what happens is you can't, and also the amount of money that they pay them is just way too low. You can't get good quality people paying them such a little amount. And what happens is this constant turnover, this constant no one showing up, and no way to sort of measure if someone has actually worked or not until maybe 1 year later when they get audited. So this fraud and this sort of waste just can continue without any real accountability. That's one way to try to fix that. We have to have a little bit more accountability as it relates to these independent contractors.
That's a great example.
Yeah, that's that's one. I have others, but that's one of them.
Yeah, it's a great example. Yeah.
And also, Brandon, and I'm talking about people with disabilities, but I also want people to understand that this can apply to anyone. I mean, you really don't know what kind of health care you have until you get very sick or you have a horrible accident. And really, when you get in that situation, the health care usually fails us. And that's something that we have to be proactive about it now before it gets to that point so that we'll have people ready for situations.
I know that Obamacare is obviously at the federal level, but how it trickles down to us, where has it been a positive for healthcare and where has it been a negative?
Well, the positive is we no longer have these pre-existing conditions, which, was horrible for people. And also we don't have these very high deductibles because prior to Obamacare, you have these, and it still exists a little bit, but not as badly. We had these you had a $10,000 deductible you had to meet before you could even get benefits. Well, that's basically no insurance for when you go to the doctors if you have a cold or just for your basic health care. So that was quite an improvement there.
Okay, that's great. Let me move on to another issue only because of our time constraints, and I really appreciate your example. I think it's really, really a great one. You talk about living wage, movement towards $15 an hour and that kind of for all workers, including restaurant workers. How do you want to roll that out for both the public and the private sector?
Well, what we have to do is, and I believe, this notion of this sort of trickle down from the top down, we've been talking about that forever, and that doesn't seem to work. We have about 46% of the people in our state living at or below the poverty level. And those people that aren't making this $15 are generally in this group. Once we start sort of at, I like to describe it as defy gravity, start where people are and raise them from minimum wage or $10 an hour to the $15 an hour, we will see growth. It will have a ripple effect everywhere. Crime will go down. They can quit that second or third job. That would help. School performances go up because parents now have the mental bandwidth, if you will, to spend time with their children and not be so stressed about just how to survive or live. It'll have a ripple effect in that way. That's why I believe it needs to happen.
Again, just a follow-up question, because obviously I think one of the areas that would be impacted by that would be the state system itself, university workers, school system, that kind of thing. Let's say you have cafeteria workers, janitorial staff, the lower paying positions. How would we fund that as taxpayers?
Well, that's one of the reasons. I'm not exactly sure how we would do it, but it has to be done. And the reason why I say that being an excuse can no longer be accepted anymore. The fact that we can't afford it and people can't afford it. We're talking about people's lives. Now, I know there is waste everywhere, just as I have seen and talked about in some of these social programs we have. I'm sure it exists in other areas. I'm certain of it. And I think if we look at everything, look at the budgets clearly and carefully, that we can find a way to do that. Absolutely. I mean, saying that it costs too much, we're talking about people's lives. I just can't take that anymore. I just can't.
Well, I think you actually said one of the most honest things I think a politician should be able to say. Well, I don't know exactly how to do it, but we need to find a way. So let me give you an example of my personal life. One of the schools that my children had in elementary school were given a big grant, and they had opportunities to buy a lot of computers, and instead we saw 2 administrative assistants be added. And odds are those administrative assistants were making $10 an hour. The computers didn't come, and you see money just being funneled in the wrong direction. So I'm not saying that I have the answers to what you're saying either. I agree with you. Let's say, for instance, we focus on pieces of what you're doing at a time and say, all right, well, we can pay for this, we can pay for that. And I think that's the most honest way to approach it, and I appreciate that you saying that. So the next one I think is a very hot – oh, go ahead.
Well, I also wanted to say, in addition to that, we talk about we can't pay teachers. And one of the things I would like to see done is to eliminate these end-of-grade testings, which cost about $12 to $20 per student. It's millions of dollars to administer these tests. I think that should go away, and that money should go to our teachers' salaries and programs to help our children, because let the teachers do what they've always done. They know what they're teaching. They know who needs help, and they know who should pass or fail. We can't use one day to determine whether a child can pass or fail, and we can use that money to pay our teachers.
Let me ask you just another question just on education really quickly here. Where do you stand on maybe trying to evaluate how we approach education, in that we've really gotten away, we appear to be moving further away from vocational educations and trade educations and keep funneling people only in one track, even though a lot of these students may not have the skill sets for that. I actually argue, most people in my circle, that most students shouldn't go to a four-year university first. They should try to get the first couple years under their belt, make sure it's what they want to do. It doesn't cost them as much. It's not such a burden if they're on loans or grants, and then they can get more specialization once they get to the latter 2 years of their undereducation.
One of the things I wanted to do, and also this sort of integrated testing funding could go to this, is we need to return sort of the trade studying back into high school, because a lot of things you can learn, especially as a vocation, can happen while you're in high school. And even by the time you graduate, you will have a skill, in mechanics or cosmetology or whatever it may be. We have to put that back into our school systems. Another thing prior to doing this and prior to my getting my daughter her benefits became sort of a full-time job. I'm a writer. I have a series of books called My Life in My Pocket that I write about. I teach in the books. They teach children how to be successful, how to think about your life and your schoolwork in a positive way. And I have a series of preschool books for every class you can take in high school: chemistry, biology, et cetera, because I taught my children those things when they were very young. We have to also teach our children how to think at a very young age. That's why I really like to heavily fund early childhood education as well. And this will help students determine, by the time they're in high school, where they want to go and what they want to do. And if we have the vocational training, at least the beginnings of it in high school, then I think they'll be that much more prepared.
Okay, that's great. I know the next topic is one that is obviously a big one for 2018, especially if you're going to advance as the Democrat nominee and face Tom Lee, and that will be the environment. Obviously, we have red tide right now, and there's been a lot of, some are hollow accusations, some sound much more sound, but some sounds like they need some direct intervention from the Attorney General's office and local politicians. Sure. Where do you think we need to do a better job, and how can your role play into that?
One of the first things I would do, and this is one of the things that's on my list as soon as I get there, my oldest daughter lives in San Francisco, and every time, she was just here, just left yesterday, every time she visits here, she's appalled how we just give out these plastic bags. We give them out every time you go to a store. One of the first things, this is something that can happen now, is to start charging for these plastic bags, 25 cents or so. That will bring awareness and ultimately eliminate them. That is one small thing that we can start to move towards bettering our environment. These bags take, I'm not exactly sure, because, the science, different people say different things, but let's say hundreds of years to decompose these bags. And they're everywhere, and that's an easy fix. That's an easy way to start that one. That's something I could do or try to implement right away. But we also have to start, we're in the Sunshine State. We have to use alternative measures for energy. And these things are already in place. We have to look at what some of the other states are doing, like California, for example, and try to do some of them. For instance, some of the things that they are implementing is all new houses, new builds, have to have solar energy, solar power implemented between now and the next 20 years. We need to start thinking that way and doing something like that. And I would love, in fact, I can't wait to get in the room and hear all the different options we can possibly do right here in our state. In particular, starting with our schools, we could put solar panels on those.
Do you think we could offer tax incentives for companies to add solar power, let's say, to their rooftops and things like that?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
I know we're moving through issues very quickly, folks. Her name is Cathy Lewis. Feel free to, we'll link to her website, and, feel free to link to her personally. The primary is right around the corner next Tuesday. Make sure you get your early ballots in. Make sure you get out and vote. And I just want to make sure we try to give you as much information as we can, but feel free to reach out to her if we didn't cover something or there's something you want more clarification on. I'm sure she'd be more than willing to answer those questions. The last one I think is probably the most polarizing. And I only want to say it, and then I want to kind of qualify where I come down on that. Is that your stance on closing the gun show loophole and, of course, banning assault rifles? And I want to say that one of my stances on this is I know we actually did in Florida pass some legislation after the wake of Parkland, and it may not be quite as aggressive as some folks want, and it may be too aggressive for other folks. But I'm willing to at least try to see where some of this lands. Clarify for me, if you would, what you mean by gun show loopholes and assault rifles, and what you think the appropriate legislation should look like.
Well, this is something that I'm unfortunately sort of familiar with. When I think about the latest shooting at the schools, I go back to my own childhood. As I said, I grew up in Baltimore, and I have been in an active shooter situation many times.
Wow.
And one of the first things you're thinking when you're like that is anyone going to come and help us? It is a horrible feeling. And what disturbs me the most is this was 40 years ago when I was a teenager. And now I see students still going to school with the same fears I had 40 years ago. Nothing has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse because now it has spread to places not necessarily stricken with poverty like where I was. What I would want to do is, when I speak of banning these assault rifles and weapons, we surely can't go door to door and collect these. We can possibly implement some sort of buyback program. Also, I'm interested in putting an additional tax on the ammunition that will fund our school psychologists and counselors, so that we make sure we have people there that can help students that seem to be struggling a bit. We don't always have that in every school, and I think that's important. We can also use some of those funds from taxing the ammunition to help with school safety, whatever that may be for each individual school. This is a very emotional subject for me, as I said. I've had several family members shot with stray bullets. They weren't criminals. We were just poor. My own mother was shot with a stray bullet, and she miraculously survived. She's 85. But this is something that has to change. Our children shouldn't go to school with the same fears I had 40 years ago. It's appalling that it continues today, and we absolutely must do something about it. So those are my suggestions and things I would work on.
Cathy Lewis, she's running for District 20. And she's facing Joy Gibson in a primary, likely to face Tom Lee when she advances. Cathy, give out your website and information that people can get in touch with you.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to add that I am recommended by the Tampa Bay Times, the Florida Sentinel Bulletin, and La Caseta. My number is, I like phone calls, so please call me, 813-981-3697, and Cathy4Florida.com, and that's FOR Florida.com.
All right. Thank you so much for being